All right, and we're recording.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. I'm Father Sergius Halverson. I teach at St. Vladimir Seminary in New York, coming to you from here, my home in New Haven, Connecticut. It's my very great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Phyllis Ennist, who's the Associate Dean for Distance Education at United Theological Seminary. I have known Phyllis for many years, more than a decade. I don't know the exact number of years we've known one another, but we've been close collaborators on a number of different projects that there's been a lengthy span of time between those projects, but a dear friend and really a well-known leader in the field of distance education. So without further ado, Phyllis, please.
So let me resume my my video so that you can see my face. Hello. I want this event to be very interactive. So if you would, if you're willing to show your face and just keep your sound muted. And I'm going to take about 5 minutes to review just where we're going in this session, and then give you some opportunities to share some of your good ideas, because I believe there's a lot of depth in the area of creating community online. And the one area that we all know the best is the discussion forums, right? We come together in the discussion forums to discuss a number of things within the class, but that seems to be one of the most used ways of creating a sense of collaboration, sense of community. Well, first I want to say that we're going to talk about discussion forums, and not just for confirming that students have done their homework or read the book or reviewed the web page or whatever it is that's been assigned. And we want to think about creative ways of using discussion forums that are going to affect our outcomes, our objectives in the course. And then we want to talk about how do we get that engagement to be learning centered. And then we want to talk about collaborative teams and group engagement and how that might help to create a sense of community in a new way. I want to tell you that, just to give you a little background, I did my bachelor's degree at Franklin University in Columbus, Ohio, and they are very well known for student-centered learning. They developed their own learning management tool, and they really do collaborative learning very well. And every class that I was in, there were some projects that had to have collaborative learning. And I found it to be much more engaging than a discussion forum, because I got to know a lot of the students very well. But what is it that forms community? Well, very well-known scholars have said that it's active, interactive involvement, both course content and personal communication. It's also, collaborative learning is evidenced by comments directed primarily student to student rather than student to instructor. Socially constructed meaning evidence by agreement of questioning with intent to achieve agreement on issues of meaning. Sharing resources among students, expressing support and encouragement, exchanging between students as well as instructors. So that's what they think creates community, this engagement, we'll call it, for a short term for all of the things that I just said. Now I want to look at discussion forums in particular as one of those sources of creating community. Well, how many of you, just by the raise of hand, so I can see that you agree or not, how many have ever used the discussion forum as a means of checking to see if students have actually read and gotten something out of the homework, the book you assigned to them? Or, I mean, I have, and I have formulated what I thought was meaningful questions. And how many of you have gotten responses that shows that they've never really read the material and they're making it up, right? And you know that because they've never quoted anything that had to do with the reading material you assigned. But that's one form of discussion forum. I don't know if it works really well. I've been disappointed in some degree, even asking the questions. And then there's ways of asking the questions that would help. And one of those ways is using words like describe, explain, identify, compare. We know that if we use these words, we're going to get something more than, what did you think, right? So I like to use words like this to help with the conversation. But how about if you say, find a blank that no one else has found in the reading material. Find something, and you might quote something based on that assignment. Describe the blank in a way that no one else has described it. Identify the blank that no one else has identified. So these are ways to get to a discussion about a particular subject that might enhance the results. Does anyone want to give an example of a very good example of how they've used, not just to check homework, but how to really get to a discussion question that they found to be successful that you've used? I'll give you a minute to click on your microphones. So, would I assume that everybody has gotten mediocre responses from discussions?
Well, I'll jump in. So one of the things that I've done is, and this is a little bit different because, so these are in the classes that I primarily teach are homiletics. And so there is certainly a collaborative piece to it. I try to really engage, to stimulate as much collaboration as possible. But fundamentally, you would rarely ever have in a liturgical setting a group that's presenting a homily, right? There's a personal component to it, that, a preacher is preaching. So that's one thing a little bit different in that, there are other classes that I've taught where you could have, students collaboratively work on, creating one website or one paper or something. But a homily or a sermon is a bit different. So one of the things that I've done is, and I do this both for my online classes as well for my face-to-face classes, is I have assigned peer-reviewed partners and what I do is I stagger them. So like at the beginning of the semester, they go through. So this week, somebody is required to post a draft of their sermon or their homily, and then at a certain date, and then by another date, they have an assigned peer review partner that's required to offer feedback. And then what I do is I stagger it so that, like Phyllis, like I would review your work, Sebastian would review my work, I'm not sure.
Uh-huh.
Larry would review Sebastian's, and then Phyllis would. So the point is that you don't have like, okay, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. Like I'll say like, oh, it's wonderful, and then you'll say mine's. So everyone's doing. It's kind of like a, I don't know what you call that, but it's there's a word for it. I can't think of it. But anyway, I find that has worked quite well. It takes the students a bit of time to get up to speed in terms of developing a vocabulary for how to offer critical, constructive feedback. But once they have that vocabulary, then it almost, like, I hate to say it, it almost runs itself, because they get into the pattern, they get into the rhythm of it, and they actually look for it. So like if a student posts something and their peer reviewer is a little bit slow, they'll actually reach out and say, hey, remember, you got to give me my feedback. So that's one thing I found that works particularly well.
Well, I like that, because that gets more students involved together. And we know that we can learn more from each other, and the more heads that are together, the better we really have of learning. I don't know if you guys have watched that show where they create a song and they have people that are chiming in. I forget the name of it. It's just after the Voice on Monday night. But they have this show where people are actually creating a song together, and it's much better when you've got a lot of people working on it, few heads together. Well, I want to move on to another way of discussion forums, and while these aren't new, I really think that they deserve to be thought through, and I wanted expert opinions from others that might have some things to share. So one of the ways that one of the faculty members taught was the entire class was a discussion forum. So that was it. There was the reading, and then there was the discussion forum. And of course, you've heard of this where you would break people into smaller groups. So you would direct traffic, you would put the type of people together, especially if you've got any kind of background on some of the students, and you would formulate these groups. You could use a number of ways to formulate your smaller units, but what he did was everything was posted. You'd read the material, say you would read the chapter, and he had a lengthy file on how this was to work, and that your engagement had to appear by, say, Wednesday, and then or maybe Monday, and then by Wednesday or Thursday, you had to have commented substantively on 2 or 3 other students in your group, especially if they're small groups. If the class was only 10, he might keep the whole class together. But this went, and then by Friday, he would chime in, and before the next Monday, you had to chime in again. So you had 3 different times that you had to post, and he wanted the post to be around 50 to 60 words. You could vary it if you needed a little more time to explain, but for the most part, these were reasonably short. 25 words were most of it, but their design was to have deep engagement. And he found this to be very satisfying, and he took points off very rigorously if anyone missed their deadline, and it forced people to be on top of it. He was driven by people being on top. And then we have another professor who I think is very creative. Now he wants his posts to be short sentences, but they need to be in at least 3 or 4 times in the discussion. So he's expecting them to be in there Monday, Wednesday, Friday, maybe Sunday, to engage in the class on an ongoing basis in order to keep the conversation going. And he has a rigorous assignment that he grades them on their participation. And he's looking for these short posts that are to the point and constantly engaging, so that this conversation is going on most of the week in very short pieces. But he wants this to be interactive, very interactive. And then what he does, let's say that he has 5 points that he wants to make on this discussion. Like in the classroom, the discussion would logically move from one point to another point to the other point that he was making. And when a student would say something, he would say, well, that's a great lead-in to my next question. And so he engages this all week long, puts a lot of time in, but he wants the conversation to keep moving. And he interjects the 5 different points in the stream of conversation. Now, the whole class is in, so if he's got 20, you're reading a lot of very short comments. So let me ask you guys, based on what I've covered so far, what do you think are the flaws, or what do you think are the advantages? And which system do you like best? I'm sure you've heard of similar things. What have you found that works best for you?
You're asking a very large question. And I was, that was one of the biggest issues we had at Tyndale trying to get this started, was how is this going to work? What do we do about the loss of community? Mm-hmm. I instituted a number of these strategies that you're describing, but one that has been completely accepted over the years is the participation in forums accounts for 40% of your grade. In other words, if you don't do it, your chances of passing the course are minimal. That motivates people right away. This is backed up by a very detailed grading rubric. In my perfect world, I want the students to tell the professor what their grade should be for their participation for the week, in an ideal world. And I try and write the rubrics to that degree of specificity. Group work, you are required to participate in 8 group discussions over the course, 8 out of 12 weeks. And those group discussions end with a summary paper. So the group, typically 4 or 5 students, are expected collectively to put together an argument and to present it to the balance of the class by about Friday, Saturday. I ask my professors to go into each of these discussions in the middle of the week and give your professorial once-over on how the students are doing, provide them with additional direction. And then finally, at the end of the week, after all students have been able to see all summaries and discuss them in public, professor comes in and does the final weekly summary. So in a sense, my students know that they're required to participate about 4 times a week, that one of them on a rotating basis will be doing this summary, so they're answerable to the group. And the other piece of the puzzle that I put in through our learning management system is I can require a student to make an entry before they're allowed to see everyone else's entries. Mm-hmm. So essentially, as I've described that, I'm requiring the student to put a stick in the sand. This is where my starting point is, and then we can get into the discussion, and finally, the resolution of the argument. I've found that the students like this approach. It's very predictable. The students like it, the professors like it because they're not being overworked. It does push the professor's workload into the first couple of weeks of the course, in that until we pass the drop date, we can't go into graded group work. And so in the first few weeks, there are forums, but they're ungraded, and the idea is to get students accustomed to them. Mm-hmm. So in doing that, we'll have one forum. You can bet what it is. It's called Introductions. Everybody introduce yourself. Let's know who you are and where you are. And then maybe we can talk about how your geographical location can influence the course. We do get students worldwide. Another one is our prayer forum, where we ask the class to pray together. We're a community in Christ. We're also a community of scholars. Let's say some prayers together. Again, that's a very popular thing with the students. And then the third is it's a Q&A of sorts. I basically say that we should cover most of our issues within the course, but if there's something not covered, post it into the Q&A, and it'll be addressed by the group. It's interesting. I've had students comment that they feel they're in more of a community in the online classes than they do in the face-to-face classes, because face-to-face, you come in, you're there for 3 hours, and you're gone. Online, you're interacting all week.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really appreciate that. That is a very well thought out plan. And there is different levels of what our faculty will do in their discussion forums. And I do like what you've said, because it incorporates almost everything that I had in my presentation, which was, getting people to work in a group. Maybe this isn't the only way, but the way that you've done it with the summary, that can be done very quickly, and everybody taking their turn, and they use the discussion forum to formulate that summary, because everybody's got their data right there, their comments right there.
Right.
And so it should be easy to do. I love that. Do you mind if I incorporate that into another method?
Please,
we'll call it after your name. Thank you.
Oh, it's the Tyndale method.
Anyone else want to share?
I've got one.
Yeah.
So the idea to have engaged students is for the professor, him or herself, to be proactively engaged. So what I used to do when I was teaching cyber ethics at Webster University was take the students into, as at the time, the kinds of things that we had access to were places called active worlds, or other places where you would go in as an avatar, and you would see other avatars in the area with you, and you could interact with each other through text chat. But you could actually travel places. There would be like virtual museums and things inside of these active worlds, or some of the people who would create worlds in there would create like Mars, or create a museum or something that could be explored. But because it was a cyber ethics class, we had a particular goal. So we applied Augusto Boal's Theater of the Oppressed, or techniques from Augusto Boal, into putting together small, short skits. And the skits were designed so that the students would each have a particular role, but they were designed to help encourage other people within those active worlds rooms to understand that there are certain ethical implications to anything they do. So, if you're in a room with 300 other people, and the conversations that you can hear are those with people in proximity to you, we would stay together as a group, and we'd move into an area where there'd be 15 or 16 other people, or maybe 30 other people. And I would throw out an ethical situation. I would say, randomly, I would say, "Oh, hello," whatever the name was of the other mark I would have in there with me. "How are you?" And the other person, we would enter into chat, and you would see this scrolling up on the chat room screen. And other people would be talking as well, so other people's conversation would intermingle. But you could tell when you had the effect, people would stop talking. People were watching what was happening. And one of the scenarios we played out was, "Oh, you're only 14. Send me a picture. I would love to see what you look like." And so what you would have is a predator alert. And over a series of other responses made by other team members in the group, some people would encourage her that it was okay to send a picture of herself to a stranger, and other people would say it's not. And it would resolve itself rather quickly before the Active Worlds Authority showed up to kick us out, with the perpetrator saying, "Okay, I'm really sorry. I didn't realize that it would be inappropriate for me to ask you for something." But in the meantime, 30 teenagers who were in the room at the same time would have gone through a series of ways in which to say no to inappropriate activity. And then once we had that experience, we would regroup on a discussion board. And we would talk about the kinds of things that we saw in there, the kinds of things that could have been done differently, and some of the ethical issues that came up. When I was workshopping with Augusto Boal in Omaha during his Pedagogy and Theater of the Oppressed conferences, which he did, I think, when he turned 70, that was the last one I attended. There was a lot of conversation around what we were doing, which was a theatrical method of engagement called invisible theater, in terms of the ethics of it. And people said, you know, if you do this in real space, it's inappropriate, it's unethical to put together a play where the other people in the room don't know that you're in a play. And so you're engaging them in a real life entanglement, but you are doing it without tipping the fact that that's what you're doing. But Augusto Boal said, you know, you've solved it. If this were done in virtual worlds, then there's nothing unethical about it, because everybody in there is in there as a pseudonym. Everything that's happening in there is happening in a contrived manner. Mm-hmm. Even though there's a certain authenticity that runs throughout, sort of like what we were trying to generate. He said, and the other people in the workshop experience all agreed that an invisible theater in cyberspace didn't trip any of their normal or natural ethical concerns in terms of using live subjects without their consent. But these were the kinds of things that we would have in a discussion board after the fact, or these would be the kinds of things that we would discuss before we went in. You know, what is the nature of what we're doing? What are we trying to achieve? Who are we trying to engage? You know, what target group? And you could see the effects right there on the screen as other people's conversations, other people would get involved in the conversation, or other people who were really chatty would stop being chatty. And you could tell the effect that you were having from that, and then, of course, the effect on the group that went in. But the point is to engage students in an activity that you do as a group, even though you're all remote, you're all working alone from your home computers. And this can be done without using virtual rooms. It can be done simply by taking students on a field trip. So you want to, you're teaching an art history class, you take everybody in the group, you say we're going to meet at exactly 2 p.m. Eastern time, and we're going to follow my Zoom. I'm going to open up the museum that has an interactive tour. We're going to walk through that museum and talk about it in the chat feature as a group while we move through the museum. That kind of stuff that engages students and builds a bond or a community among them as they're a part of that class is the kind of thing that will get them to engage more intentionally and more responsibly to the student learning outcomes that you have for your course. Rather than addressing just content questions, they're actually engaged in performing or demonstrating that they're achieving the learning outcomes, which is the new the thing on which all assessment hinges. That's all I have to say.
I can see, church history using something like that, because there are a lot of, there's a lot of pictures. There's in Second Life, it was kind of a...
Second Life is another one, right? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it was like that. I don't know of too many things where I know that you can, I still see where you can, through Earth, you can Google Earth, you can go to places and see real live places. I would imagine that the Holy Land might be some of those places that you could tour. But if not, there's lots of museums with artifacts and things of that nature that are online. So I was trying to wonder, how to use this as, you were talking, how to use this in theological education courses that I'm familiar with. And I think ethics, obviously, just a different scenario. What you're talking about in a way is case studies, only they're being acted out. They're being engaged with in real time so that people are seeing the demonstration, learning by doing. I like it. So that would be that's kind of a synchronous way of doing discussions, whether it's, you're still typing in the chat area for your discussion forum. But I like that. Before you all came in, Sebastian and I was talking about a new buzzword that we're seeing a lot of, and that's remote courses or learning remotely. A lot of K through 12, well, I'm learning that they're using remote to define synchronous learning in real time. Now, I don't know if any of you have a word. We use live for this synchronous time, and many people are using synchronous to do lectures and discussion in real time. Some of our professors are doing this. We used to have a group in the classroom, and we used a Cisco product called Live Presentation, and we used Teams, WebEx Teams, to facilitate the discussion or anything that you might want to write in the chat feature while the class is going on. It also, you can record the lecture and leave it posted in that environment, and students can come in anytime they want, replay that, look at some of the questions that were asked. So what do you guys call your synchronous WebEx, Zoom, Skype classes? Do you guys have a name? Or even people that are with us but are not, we don't see you, but we would still love to hear if you have a term that you're using for this. And I'm asking it for a purpose of it's a sense of community. It's a different way of creating community because it's live. And obviously it is different than a discussion forum, but Sebastian kind of got us on that path. So does anybody call it something else?
We just refer to it as a live streamed class.
Live stream class.
Yes, and I don't like that because there's a product called live stream, but that's what they decided on.
Yeah, well, it does give you the, you could think that it's live streaming video, but I guess it also needs an explanation. I'm not sure that remote is a good term, but people seem to get it right off.
Well, I've never liked the word remote because it implies geography.
Yes.
And, I think we'd all agree that the purpose behind online learning is to eliminate geography. I'm always amazed. I've got students all over the world, so my little mission of Paul goes on.
I would say less than eliminate, because people still are contextualized within their locations.
Oh, that's good. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I would say that it negotiates geography in a different way. But you're not just negotiating geography; you're negotiating time, because people who are scattered all over the planet are in different time zones. So you put together we call it video conferencing, a video conference with somebody with a class of students in all 4 time zones of the United States and one guy in Singapore. You got to negotiate not only the geography, but you got to negotiate the time zones, which I guess is a part of negotiating geography, because they're time zones because of where the sun hits at different times. So.
Well, we called ours live as an acronym for live interactive virtual education. And that's a mouthful, but that's the way we've explained it, on the website. And then after that, everybody calls it live. And so that's kind of worked for us, but we've had to explain it. And it's different than our hybrid classes, where you're coming in part of the time in real time. Now, if time goes on with the coronavirus, we will think of hybrid as being strictly some synchronous on Zoom or WebEx or something, with other time in more of a traditional online.
Hmm.
I mean, it will change just based on the world we're in. Moving on to some other thoughts that I had in this creating a sense of community. I find that doing anything where you get people engaged together, the more often and the more personable that learning can be, the more sense of community you have. More often and more personable. People seem to want to know each other before they really share much of what they're thinking. And so you have to allow that time. And I loved your idea of the prayer. We have faculty that use that prayer forum extensively, and that creates that sense of personable aspect. So
another thing that we're doing with the prayer side, like all schools, we have our weekly chapel, and I'll stream that directly into the learning management system and then archive it, so that not only are you part of the community of the class, but now you're part of the community of the institution.
And it's Larry, right?
Yes, it is.
And where are you from?
I'm at Tyndale up in Toronto.
Okay.
Only for another month, though.
Yeah, I was going to say not for very long. Sorry.
Where are you going?
I'm retiring. The time has come,
Well,
and I didn't see the coronavirus coming, but the time has come for me to carry on into the next steps.
Yes, well, I'm working on that as well, and looking forward to doing something different.
Yep.
But I won't take your time up talking about that. But
Let me just throw one in. They've created a consulting position for me on accessibility.
yeah.
I'm going to spend the next year and a half doing only accessibility for the seminary.
Well, that's excellent. And I think you have an accessibility conference coming up, or?
Yes, there was. It's been canceled because of the virus. Coming up in Guelph, Ontario.
Okay. So are you going to move it to online?
For the last 15 years, I've been doing most of my work from exactly where you see. and they say, why don't we ever see you? I say, well, because everything I do is online, so it doesn't matter where I am.
Yes. So what are some of the advantages of being more collaborative and actively engaged? Jan Engel, Governor's University, put together a short list, which I thought was helpful. I know her through EDUCAUSE, and she says developing higher level thinking skills causes the students to think more thoroughly on the topics and therefore exchange of ideas, encourages the exploration of alternative perspectives and solutions. I know we all agree on these, but I wanted to state them. Simulates critical thinking and helps students to clarify ideas through discussion and debate. Generates solutions that are typically better than one student can develop working individually, particularly on a complex project. And I know that these are very familiar to most of us. We've been in distance learning for a while. I don't know all the people that have joined us, and so I don't know where they're from or the level of engagement that they have in creating some of the learning material, whether they're involved in helping faculty as a content management expert, or if they're actually doing the teaching. But I wanted to also, I wanted to name these things because the more that you get people together in a collaborative, whether it's doing a case study together, as was mentioned, or whether it's having these robust discussions that take place and different people have to chime in. One of the things that I did at Franklin in a collaborative setting was that we each had to take a portion of the project. Like, let's say that we were creating an understanding of web design. That was one of the classes that I had. That's an easy one to think about because it does have different roles. So there was the people who created the content. There were people who edited the writing to make sure that it was web ready, that it was more bullet points. And then there were people that created the theme, the coloring, and it was all based on the audience. And so there were different steps that each person had to control. And then in the final ending, one person put it together in the web page. But when you think about theological education, there's lots of things that could be created, whether it's timelines, whether it's a complete essay about a certain subject, whether it's bringing in, as I'm thinking about this idea of collaborative work, we're reading a book in my theology class by Ratzinger, and it is his introduction to theology. It's a very detailed work, and I find it to be very hard reading. At times you have to really focus to gather it. But what's great, I would have loved to had the final project put together with a number of people so that we could have done a deeper dive instead of everyone doing a deeper dive, which isn't going to happen because there isn't enough time. If you guys have read any of Ratzinger's introduction, he was the late cardinal. I think most of you know who he was. But I think a project like that would have incorporated the following skills that would have come out of a project like that, which is teamwork skills. Not only would we have learned deeply about the subject, but we would have also created teamwork, negotiating skills. Who's going to do what? How is it going to be done? And feedback skills, ways of getting back. Okay, I liked what you had to say about the Trinity, but one of the points that I thought we should have covered was, and therefore that would have been ways of giving feedback to someone on their portion. The communication skills that are required, project management skills, interpersonal skills, and then dealing with diversity and how people might have looked at each of these categories that we would have discussed. With those ideas in mind, I guess I'm wondering, why is it that many people don't use this group work idea for more of their assignments? So go ahead.
Sure. So yeah, I think one of the reasons is that the evaluative instruments that are most common in seminary education are essentially they're solo projects, right? I mean, the vast majority of authors write books alone. I mean, yes, there are, even if you have a book that has a number of authors, you have each author writes one chapter by him or herself. Very rarely, I mean, occasionally you'll have, maybe a celebrity, and then they'll have a ghostwriter that works with them, to kind of edit their thoughts and things. But most writing, especially most academic writing, takes place, it's a solo thing. And if you even look at kind of the broad, academic world, tenure in a tenure track institution is not granted based on one's collaborative work, right? It's based on one's solo work, right? How many book papers have you authored, or have you been the lead author in the science world? So my opinion is that the vast majority, and for a long time I felt this way, and maybe I'm an outlier, but I think that the evaluative instruments in seminaries tend to be radically skewed towards kind of solo output, when in fact the vast majority of ministry is collaborative work. So I just don't think, so a great example I think of the collaborative kind of work is the kind of work that students are required to do in CPE, where it's all about engaging with real live people in clinical or pastoral contexts, and then that group work that they do, critically reflecting on those interactions. So I think one of the reasons, to answer your question, sorry that was I was rambling, but I think one of the reasons that they don't use a lot of the strategies that you're talking about is because fundamentally seminaries are not set up to use collaborative work, or even to train students to do collaborative work. I wish they were, but I don't think they are.
So I think you're right. I also think that it requires a lot of work to set it up. You have to define the roles. You have to help people to understand the framework, how it's going to be done, and then they have to have time to meet, right? So if they're doing it on their own, they can throw it together at the last minute. No deadlines are not multiple deadlines. So I understand some of the thinking, but when I look at these skills that are developed, and I think about the ministry potential, and as a minister, especially right now, I mean, can you imagine if our classes would have been more collaborative, and they would know how to do this online, small groups, online, church. But I think that you're right, that pastors generally speak, and they're delivering a sermon that they've written themselves, and they're delivering it themselves. But that's just like, 10% or less of their work. And when I think about what we're preparing in our institution, we're mostly preparing people for the church work, pastoring, lay leadership, deacons. Anyone else have some insights about how to incorporate or how to get more of our faculty to do collaborative learning activities?
Well, right now, I think they would do it if they would just promise some social interaction.
Right. That's a need right now of all of us.
Sure. Well, one way is for faculty to partner with other faculty, in the teaching of courses. So, at Kenrick Seminary, we used to have the scripture guy or the homiletics professor come talk to the scripture classes. And they would put together a shared project that would count for credit in both courses. But the goal was to have them apply the scripture they were learning into actual preaching situations. So, I mean, that's one kind of collaboration among faculty. But those kinds of collaborations among faculty lend themselves to collaborations among students, because students have to be engaged if they're taking both classes. They have to be engaged in both environments at the same time. So that's one thing. Other people may have other thoughts too.
Well, I find that they don't get good reviews as easily when they have these group projects. They're a source of conflict for students. They see it as an extra burden. At least our students do. They haven't been sold on the advantages completely. Well, we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to give room, not that we haven't had people chiming in, but is there anyone else that wants to ask any questions over anything that we've covered and share? I know I've gotten a lot out of this, and I've gotten some good ideas that, well, maybe I've heard before, but maybe I haven't put them all together in a package that I could share with faculty. Any other questions or thoughts?
So I have a suggestion. Because I mean, you're framing the question in a kind of an interesting way, in sense of how can we be more persuasive in terms of engaging our faculty with these possibilities, which is, it's not totally disassociated from how can we do it more effectively with students, but in a way it's actually sometimes harder to persuade fellow faculty members to do this stuff than it is to just say, all right, students, here's how we're going to do it, and get with the program. One of the things that I this is from my personal experience, it's easier to, well, it's more enjoyable, it's more personally rewarding for me to teach when my students are producing better work. You know, there's nothing more onerous than having to evaluate shoddy work, or, you know, bad work or sloppy work. It feels to me like the kind of the academic equivalent of cleaning toilets. You know, it's like, oh, no, not again, right? And I wonder if it was possible for us to demonstrate to our colleagues that when students were engaging in this kind of collaborative work, that the ultimate output that they would create is of a much higher caliber. And therefore it would make the teaching experience more personally rewarding for the faculty member. That might be a strong persuasive, that might be a strong way to motivate it.
Yeah, I like that.
As you were speaking there, Father, it just was going through my head, the comments that are coming through from the students themselves. Now, I had students in their course evaluations telling me, and it's been going on for years now, I feel like I learned more and I learned better in the online program than in the on-ground. Now, if that's what your students are saying to you in those anonymous evaluations, it's easier to get faculty to start listening. All of a sudden, what they're seeing is the student satisfaction level going up. That's a very positive thing. And then when we try and nail down, well, what's caused that, then it's the instructional design approaches that we've built into these courses. It's at that point that you can start, I think, leveraging forward. Because it's no longer me just telling you. It's now your students telling you that this works for them. And if it works for you, then we're all good. The other piece of the pie that I always include everywhere are the detailed grading rubrics. When I'm developing a course with a faculty member, you know, first question, what are the assessments? And let's get them under a rubric. So I've got, I think, 16 or 18 different models, and I'll ask my faculty to tailor it to their assignment. And then again, I'm taking away from the student the non-accountability. You now know exactly what you need to get an A or a B. Or if you're satisfied, you can get a C, whatever you want. But there it is in black and white. That's what you need to do. And that, in turn, has direct relationship to the overall learning outcomes specified in the syllabus. So it's an accountability thing. It's an empowerment for the student, and it's an empowerment for the faculty, because students have been forced to reflect on what they've done before it's finally submitted. Fun times.
Well, I'm ending a little bit ahead of time. If anyone out there who has not chimed in before would like to add something, we would love to hear from you. Go ahead.
I just have a short commercial.
All right.
The commercial's this. On Friday, we'll be doing a listening session. Then Larry will be leading it. concerning things that are going well and things that we would like to just bounce off other people. At the same time, 2 p.m. Eastern, using this same link and the same phone number. So if anybody's interested in coming on Friday, please do. In addition, we are putting together a book of our experiences. The chapters are due on May 15th. If anybody would like to submit something to this book, we would be delighted to have it. It's a book about how we're responding in an age of remote, emergency remote instruction or emergency remote teaching. And just things that will be tips for people going forward. If the deadline is May 15th, we'll have the book published by the beginning of June, and hopefully it'll be able to benefit some theological educators if this COVID-19 social distancing lasts into the fall term, which is what some people are predicting. So more information about that can be found on our website at distancelearningdirectors.org. That's all for me.
Well, since we're making a
Sebastian,
plug,
Ontario has just extended quarantine for another 30 days.
Wow. God bless you.
That's our summer semester.
what was your comment? What has been extended?
The social distancing because of the virus. We've been in it for a month now, and as of yesterday, the government has extended that for another month. So May 12th is the new Hope Day. But that in turn says our summer semester is going to be online.
Yes, all of our classes are as well. Just a plug about a course that I'm teaching. It is online teaching strategies. And it is a course that has a number of ideas. It has details on how to structure discussions. For example, many of the things we've talked about here, it gives you a template on different ways of engaging students. It has all kinds of details on tools that you can have to do activities online. So there's a wide range of things that we teach, as well as how to convert one of your face-to-face classes into an online course. And this starts June 8th, and it is on our website at united.edu. So if any of you are interested in having any of your faculty or passing the word along, you can go to united.edu and look for online, and it'll be listed there as one of the certificate programs, Online Teaching Strategies. So it was great being with you guys. Thank you for sharing. You helped me to learn some new things, and I hope that you've been able to as well in sharing the ideas.
Before you give the last word, Phyllis, I know we only have 2 more minutes, but at some point in time for a future discussion, I'd be really interested in hearing what people have to say about developing trust and encouraging vulnerability vis-a-vis building community. If I were to sum it up, I mean, those would be the kind of the 2 fundamental things that you need for community. Is people need to be willing to be vulnerable, and in order to that takes a risk. It takes kind of a confidence, and then it's kind of a feedback. The more they feel that they're in a community of trust, the more they feel like they can be vulnerable, the more the trust builds. I might be missing something there, but at some point in time, it'd be interesting to talk more about that and what can we do as facilitators, educators, to intentionally create a space of trust where vulnerability is possible. Again, because I think that's really what defines community, when people feel like they can be vulnerable with one another and they are trusted. So just throwing that out.
If I may lob it back at you, Father Sergius, would you be willing to lead a session on that next Wednesday?
Yeah, let me check my schedule. Thank you, Sebastian. Very nicely done. Touche, my friend. Send me an email and I'll have to double check because we've not yet come to Easter. We Eastern Orthodox Christians, we're in Holy Week now. So
happy
my
Spy
brain's
Wednesday.
different. Thank you very much. Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you. Would somebody like to close this in prayer?
Phyllis, you did such a nice job. Thank you so much. Why don't you lead us in prayer?
I'd love to. God, thank you for this opportunity to join like-minded people who are concerned about learning. Lord, we just thank you for the opportunity, the technology that's been discovered that we can do this. It is by your hand, it is by your gifting that we're even able to connect and talk states apart, worlds apart. And I thank you, Lord, for being here with us. I ask that you would, in the coronavirus, that it would die out soon rather than later. We just thank you, Lord, for your provision. We thank you for the things that you're going to do in spite of the tragedy. And Jesus, we love you. We thank you, Lord. Amen.
Amen.